Hey, all you beautiful Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think changing our workplace, fixing our workplace can fix our world, I got a real treat for you today because this is some of my favorite people right here. We're doing our quarterly conversation about hot topics in ethics and compliance. So let's get a massive emoji explosion to get. Is that something? Okay. We're going to have a massive emoji explosion to get going. We got the one and only Karen Moore and the coolest guy in compliance, Matt Kelly. I got a couple of quick announcements for you today. We're, of course, giving away books. I love giving away books. We gave away hundreds over at SCCE last week, and we're giving away 5 today. The book that we're going to feature today is Ethical Machines. I was just talking with a friend that was introduced by my good buddy, Reed Blackman, this book, Ethical Machines. There's no better time to read that. You can pick any of the books from the Ethical Library. And if you don't know what's in there, hit that QR code right now. And if you're here for credits, this is the place to be, whether it's the Compliance Certification Board, whether it's HRCI or SHRM. This is the place to come for free credits. And if you are in Nashville or haven't been to Nashville and you want to dust off those cowboy boots and fun cowboy hat, come on out to Nashville for the Opal Transforming Healthcare Conference. We got a code for you, Ethico 50, to get 50% off. That is on middle of October. I can't believe it's already, Q3 is already almost over. October 14th and 15th in Nashville. Come on by. It's going to be a great conference. Opal always puts on great conferences. They got a lot of great speakers. So go ahead and Google that and check it out. And if you can make it, you should come. Also, if you have not taken this Enneagram quiz, you absolutely should. We did an Enneagram conversation at SCCE last week or a couple weeks ago, and it got a lot of great reviews. And the Enneagram has been kind of life-changing for me. So if you've not scratched the surface of it, I'd encourage you to do that. A great way to do that is to hit this QR code, and we'll drop a link in the chat. It's a quick quiz, and really, our job is to really lean into our strengths. We're all wired with different strengths. And when we can lean into our strengths and be more in tune with those, we can really put those to work to drive more impact in our programs and also to be more, collaborative, to be more impactful and effective with the people on our team. So this thing is really cool. This quiz is really cool. It's going to highlight your type, and it's going to give you some tips on what you could be leaning into. Speaking of leaning into things, we want to lean into maximizing employee touch points. So there are risk owners inside your organization. There are human sensors in your organization, and you can't do ethics and compliance or human resources on your own. This is a people business at the end of the day. And when we can bring people into that fold and really give them the right experience, we start to really get a lot better risk intelligence that we can utilize to make better bets with our time and resources. Remember, work fills the available time. The scope of ethics and compliance is expanding faster than the resources we're getting. So it becomes more and more important to make better bets with our time. So Ethico has in-house risk specialists that are trained. All the supervisors are CC EP certified. They got their compliance certification board test, and that really helps us show up as a better extension of your team. We spend as much time as necessary, up to, on average, we spend about twice as long on the phone than our competitors, and we get a 92%. Imagine that 92% positive rate for people calling in to what is, in many cases, a complaint line. So that gives you much better information to hit the ground running, your investigators to hit the ground running, and to close those cases 2 times faster. So if you haven't checked out our benchmark report, you definitely should. And if you are feeling frustrated with your current vendor, now's the time to make a change as we're starting to look toward 2026. So we have the employee engagement package. This gives you everything you need to crowdsource that risk intelligence, both on a reactive and a proactive way. We have this world's best hotline in place, world's best case management system. Not my words. Check out G2 if you haven't seen it. Disclosures built in, so you can get all that stuff into one system, and remediation controls right into the system. So many times an investigation is not when an investigation ends, it's not the end of something, it's the start of something. And in a world where we need to be able to prove our effectiveness, we need to be able to make sure that all these cases are being handled appropriately and in a consistent way. Exit and stay interviews are a great way to pull some of that information in during that employee life cycle that is really akin to the same stuff that somebody ends up raising their hands about. So if you are interested in that, you should be. 25% off for all my Ethicuties. And listen, if you have not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, I just want to say that one more time. You absolutely should. This is, of course, free to join. All the events show up directly on your calendar, and you can pop in and out anytime. So as we keep keep going through here. Drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. Connect with at least one person today. Now is the time to really build your network out, really expand this network, and really tap into this amazing community that we're all a part of, where we can crowdsource crowdsource solutions to the problems that we're facing. If you have not subscribed to Matt Kelly's blog, Matt Kelly's newsletter, you absolutely should. Control-T or Command-T, if you're on a Mac, will pop up a new tab, type in Radical Compliance, and go ahead and drop your email in there. That is a newsletter that I always look forward to. Always smart things coming out from Matt Kelly. So, Matt, I'm going to pass it on over to you. Welcome. Let's get one more massive emoji exposure. We're only at 200 right now. What the heck is going on? This is a once in a lifetime event. How's it going, Matt?
It's going very well, Nick. Thank you very much. And hello, everybody who's joining us today. We are here for our quarterly roundup of ethics and compliance news, where Nick and I and Karen Moore, longtime compliance officer and corporate board consultant, we are going to go through some of the big stuff that we have seen in third quarter, which unbelievably is already just about over. And what does that mean for ethics and compliance officers, the programs you run, how you should be thinking about it? We do have a lot of stuff that we want to cover, but of course, we are also here to help the listeners. So if you have an issue that you have seen that you want us to discuss that we forgot, by all means, pop it into the chat. Let us know what's on your mind. We'll see if we can work that into the discussion over the next hour or so. And before we go any further, Karen, welcome. Thank you for joining us as always.
Always a pleasure.
So I wanted to start by talking about, one of the more sensitive things that has happened in the United States lately, but investigations around social media posts that really came to the fore after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. He was shot, he was killed. Some people admired what he said, some people did not. A lot of people made statements on social media about him, and some of them were really inflammatory. And I was fascinated to see that right away, other people who supported Charlie Kirk, or at least did not like what others were saying detracting Charlie Kirk, they were starting to match online statements about him to actual people, and then start saying, well, you said this about Charlie Kirk, therefore you should be investigated. Your company, why are you employing this person? Shouldn't they be fired? There was just an awful lot of attention to social media posts and people tying the posts back to actual persons, and then contacting the person's employer to say, why won't you take action against him, or you should, or something like that. Now, what intrigued me the most about this was that in some percentage of cases, how many, we don't know, maybe a lot, maybe a little, but in some percentage of cases, people were getting this wrong, and they were associating social media posts with some other person who had never said anything about Charlie Kirk. I got to thinking about that a lot. And how are compliance and HR teams supposed to handle employees saying something inflammatory online, or employees being accused of it? Because a lot of times it's not necessarily clear that an account on social media is or isn't actually associated with John Doe, person X, your employee. Maybe they said it, maybe it's a real account, maybe it's a fake account, maybe some bot churned out 1,000 accounts, scooped up 1,000 photos at random. One of them happened to be one of your employees, and they created this. Now, this is not far-fetched. Like fake accounts in social media happen all the time. And I'm just curious about how companies can handle this when there might be something that is not provable or disprovable about your employee. Like, what are you supposed to do here? And what length are you supposed to go to try and figure out who said what, and then therefore what do we do? Karen, I'll put it to you first, and then Nick, and certainly listeners, if you have thoughts about this too. But I am just stuck on, what do we do with complaints like this and how they might not be investigatable? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely complicated one, and it's complicated on so many different levels, because on the one level, you've got this whole kind of political violence question that has now come to the fore, which I guess is a good thing in that it's in the public discourse. So people are now talking about it. So set that aside. I'm old enough to have been there at the very beginnings of this whole social media explosion and what people can and can't do, and also kind of on the brink of all the privacy discussions about what is your private life versus your work life, and what can you say and do in private life that doesn't affect your work life or your position in the workplace, and grappling with the development of social media policies by companies. Certainly there's a legal basis for employment action and even termination for public comments in certain circumstances, and particularly when the company's reputation may be at stake, or you may have customer backlash. How you sort out the customer backlash from what I think, Matt, you and other conversations have called synthetic allegations, these kind of made up body of allegations is another question. But how clear is the company policy? How fair is the company policy? And how is it perceived by employees? Because my initial reaction is, this is my private life. This is my private opinion. I should be free to express my opinion about things in a way that should not impact who I am at work. It becomes complicated, right? It becomes that cognitive dissonance issue. Do I think one way privately and I'm being asked to think a different way at work? Should work be concerned about what I'm saying in my private life, but in a public forum? Should my company be concerned about what customers or business partners are saying about me, and the fact that they may not want to work with a company that continues to employ people like me? And then how does that, in the wrapped up in First Amendment free speech rights, start to affect or limit people's perceptions of who they are and what they can do or say? So all that is by a long roundabout way of saying I don't have a good answer here. I do think companies need a clear social media policy that is fair. I think some best practices need to be set out for employees. Like, first of all, maybe you want to share your opinion more in a closed forum than in an absolutely public forum where everybody, all and sundry, can see. It may be more meaningful to you. Maybe your profile, I've started to see it even on LinkedIn, where people are starting to back off having their company name in the very, very first tagline. Maybe your profile should be clearly personal and not associated with the company. Maybe when there are really big events, very divisive events like the Charlie Kirk assassination, maybe that's a time for really immediate leadership communications. This is a terrible thing. We know that people have their own opinions about Charlie Kirk and who he was and what his statements were, but we all want to be respectful. Please, let's all take care about how we are expressing ourselves. I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't have a total answer for this. I'm really curious, Nick, to hear what you think and what the people online think as well and what they're doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of action in the chat. Just to get super tactical, well, I guess before that, I think a lot of companies are getting, I think these knee-jerk reactions that we're seeing from some companies can kind of expose them to more legal risk than that initial misconduct. We're all kind of accountable for what we do, and an organization can do kind of what it wants. And, we all kind of like face the ramifications of those things. If someone fires somebody unnecessarily, then they can open themselves up to a lawsuit. If someone says something stupid or acts stupid or is recorded doing something stupid, like at a concert or something, there's going to be ramifications for that kind of across the business. So I don't think that, or, kind of across the career or across the marketplace, I don't think any of that is new. And I think we've seen sort of different forms of this kind of doxing and, people being sort of held to account, whether justly or unjustly, over the last 5 years. That's increased kind of substantially. I think to get super tactical, there should probably be, like, as a policy from a corporate perspective, there should probably be a 48 to 72 hour kind of cooling off period to where, this thing can be investigated. I also think that having kind of fact checking protocols for these kinds of issues, I saw in the chat, somebody said, I'm dealing with this, right now. We're all going to deal with this at some kind of degree, right? And So I think, like, again, when we can help our organization see around the curve and put some things in place, some basic protocols or some basic sort of policies on how we're going to fact check and like what a sketch of that decision making process should be, and we can get out ahead of it, like you said, with some, with a statement or something like that when an event like this happens in this sort of highly divided time that we're all living in, regardless of which side you may be on. I think those are things that can help kind of de-risk a situation and not get caught in sort of a negative outcome if there is, a knee-jerk kind of response in the absence of these kinds of guardrails.
So
yeah, and Matt, I only wanted to add that the difficulty is that really fine line between expressing an opinion that is completely inappropriate, like advocating violence, for example, from I just have an opinion on things that may or may not be popular, but it's my opinion. I think that's the really hard thing, where I think, to have a credible company position, you have to tread a very, very fine line there.
I guess the thing that I'm grappling with, and we had a lot of people who are saying that, yes, the company should have a policy, or if you're going to say something, you do it on your own time, your own account, from your own computer. I get all of that, and I agree with that. I am alarmed, however, at the idea of doxing incorrectly. I'm not even sure I like the idea of doxing people correctly, but if you correctly call out that Joe Schmo is, in fact, a hateful, terrible human being who is breaking the law, employer, why are you hiring him? But you have the right guy. Like, okay, maybe that's a net positive that we have found some miscreant who needs disciplinary action. But it's going to be easier and easier. And I think Wendy Badger here, she pointed out, this could be a fake profile, and your employee never set it up. Your employee doesn't even know about it. And you suddenly are getting besieged by people who have tagged your company. Now, this is not a hypothetical. This actually happened to a Walmart employee who someone somewhere out there grabbed his photo and started making very offensive statements about Charlie Kirk.
Jeez.
And they tagged Walmart and the company's corporate line. So Walmart suspended the person with pay while they investigated. But it was not his account, and he had never really said anything other than, I think he'd like to tweet about soccer for various personal reasons.
How dare he?
What do you do with, like, to what lengths are you going to go to investigate? Is this really this account associated with this person, like the online activists are saying? If you get it wrong, you have a wrongful termination suit on your hand from the employee. If you fire them, or if you don't fire them, how do you explain that? So those are some of the other questions that I think about a lot here. Like, to what lengths will you need to go to investigate these, like I said before, synthetic allegations? They are about a real person, but some of the allegations might not be provable or unprovable. What are you supposed to do with that?
And with resources, I would like to add.
And with limited resources, yes, that's a good point. Although, Karen, I also just wanted to tag on one thing I'll put to you. How should companies communicate their decisions here, which are probably going to be under a microscope? Probably people won't agree with the decisions they made. But at the SCCE conference, you had talked a bit about communicating to people after an investigation about what the decision is. Like, what should people be keeping in mind as they think through these kind of problems?
Yeah, I think any kind of investigation outcome has a teachable moment and communication opportunity about company expectations. When you've got a negative outcome, a substantiated allegation, it means that someone somewhere, for some reason, failed to act in accordance with corporate expectations of business conduct, even if that business conduct kind of starts spreading outside of the four walls of the office. And I always feel, contrary to a lot of my legal colleagues' opinion, that the communications that you make about those kind of events are really important communications. They help to reset the expectations and reset what is right and what is wrong in the organization. It helps to reinforce the kind of the investigations process and the fairness of it, or not, depending on how people, I guess, view the underlying facts. But More importantly, it's a leadership statement of we mean what we say. We have a policy, and we enforce that policy, and we mean it, up to the point of even losing really good people who just get it wrong despite our best efforts to express those expectations. So, but it's not always an easy outcome, is where I keep coming back to. And one person here, I didn't note their name, asked the question, should the expectations be different, depending on where you are in the organization? And my answer is sometimes. And I have a great example of that, a real life example from way back, another company before the company, where we had to grapple with a country manager visiting prostitutes in a country in which prostitution is legal. But all sorts of, kind of rumblings came up because his home base was in a country where prostitution is not legal and not expected and not viewed very favorably. So what do? He wasn't acting illegally, but he was acting in some lens immorally. How do you evaluate that? How do you discipline that? Or what about the government relations director who starts posting very, firm political opinions, divisive political opinions about the very institutions or individuals who are clients of the company? Do you treat that person differently than you treat somebody in accounts? So we're all over the place. Sorry, I veered away from your communications message.
I want to hear more about that guy. Just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, we counseled him at the end of the day, that you're in the spotlight. The higher you up in the organization, the more light is shown on you, and even things that are perfectly legal may be viewed unfavorably, and you should check yourself. But he lived to work another day.
Okay, issue number 2 in this HR vein. We have some enforcement stuff we might talk about later on in the hour. But another really interesting article I saw a couple of weeks ago now in the Wall Street Journal, but it was mentioning how large corporations are now getting rid of managers. So I started thinking about, how does this complicate the compliance officer's job? We always talk about how mood at the middle is so important. However, if you are trimming your middle managers by 5%, 20%, 30%, or you're just not hiring anymore as you continue to grow the rank and file of the company, what are compliance officers supposed to do in this world where there are fewer managers who are invaluable allies for an ethics compliance function? Number one, the managers who are still there, they might have their teams go from, they have 5 or 6 direct reports to 20. Good luck getting those managers to spend much time thinking about the importance of ethics and culture, or talking about it, when they have so many different people that they have to oversee. Good luck with getting them to pay attention to internal reports, because they might also be the next ones to be laid off. They've got work to go through the pipeline. There's a lot of different ways that if the middle managers are fewer, more frazzled, more overworked, that's really going to tie the compliance team up in knots. So, Karen, I'll start with you for some thoughts about that first, and then Nick, I'd love to hear it from you. Listeners, if you have seen this in your own organization, or what concerns would you have, pop it into the attendee chat. But this seems like a big deal to me.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I'm all for flattening out a bit organizations when that's possible, when the culture affords it. I know some organizations have a very hierarchical culture, but if you don't have too many levels to go through, I think it can enhance speaking up. People feel a little closer to more senior levels of the organization. On the other hand, I think a much bigger hand is your point, Matt, which is that the managers are really the bulwark of compliance. They're the ones that both get the instruction from above and the kind of pressure from above to perform, and also the responsibility from below to manage a team. And so they're kind of the both the buffer and also the expression of what compliance really means in the organization. They're the ones that see things. They're the ones that control things. And the more you get rid of them, I think your point is spot on, that you end up with super large teams that don't feel like anybody knows who they are, or care about who they are. And you also get a kind of very insubstantial expression of company expectations, because the managers are the ones that are modeling. It's not, people aren't looking up to the C-suite to see how policies are being implemented. They look to their manager. They look to the person who's directly controlling their lives. So I think it's problematic for all sorts of reasons.
Well, it at least shifts. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
No, go right ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like, it kind of sort of fundamentally shifts the sort of risk profile of the organization for a lot of the reasons that you just talked about, right? Manager has to manage a lot more people. They might not know how to handle issues. They might not have the bandwidth to handle those kinds of issues. As you know, that's obviously a higher pressure kind of a situation if your team size doubles and you're one of those last managers that are left standing, that have trickle down effects, right? To your point, Karen. The way, people quit managers, they don't quit companies, you know what I mean? So as those stresses and as those pressures on those folks, increase, then the way that they behave most likely is going to change to some degree. So I think that change in the risk profile of the organization should cause us to kind of look at that and say, well, what are some of the potential negative consequences of this? Like, if this goes poorly, what should I kind of start to see? And I think going through that kind of a thought experiment can give us maybe some hints. I mean, again, I talk about this all the time. We're making bets with our time. We're thinking in bets. That's one of my favorite books. But like, we have to think in bets. And if the flop is not what we were expecting, then there's a poker analogy. If the flop's not what we're expecting, then we need to adjust our betting strategy, and we need to adjust how we're playing that hand. And we need to run kind of a simulation on like, well, what will the future kind of hold given this new set of information that I have? I think we can think through some of those things. So all that said, I think it also kind of presents a massive opportunity for ethics and compliance teams, because it becomes then increasingly more important for those managers to be part of the risk management apparatus. Our pitch to those managers to bring us into conversations or to direct conversations or, reports that they have, to the compliance team for us to kind of help handle some of that load becomes a lot more compelling. And I just think there's a lot of new angles that something like this presents for a compliance team that's trying to expand its footprint in the organization or expand its influence in the organization. This sort of this different sort of composition, or this different ratio of like managers to frontline workers, as you said, creates, again, new strain on those managers. And there's new things that we can help out with, and there's new things that we can, Hema always says this, and I think a lot of other people have said it, like, ethics and compliance is a servant to the organization. And now there's some new things that we can serve people with. There's new things that we can intersect with these people whose, scope of their work has expanded considerably to help them do their job better. The pressures on those folks are not going down in this situation. So when we can come as like a Sherpa, or we can come as a trusted advisor, so to speak, to help lighten some of that load and help them see around the curve, or present some resources for some of the risk intelligence ultimately that they might be receiving. I think that gives us kind of a new in. You know what I mean?
But I also wonder, Nick, what happens to the strategic horizon? Because when you've got layers in an organization, that horizon is far away, or should be far away. The more senior you are in the organization, and closer, the lower you are in the organization. If you get rid of a lot of the people that are looking in the mid to short term, like, how do we work? Does that mean that the senior people bring their horizon closer at the expense of having a longer term strategy? Or do you miss that kind of shorter term implementation of strategy resources that middle management's really executing?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not like advocating for this per se. And that's what I was kind of saying. Like, if you pop the hood on your car and you just start kind of ripping out hoses and stuff, like, I don't think I need this, then like the car's just going to run in a different way. It might not run at all. And in most kind of corporate decisions that are made, at this kind of a level, it's not really that surgical. It's like there's a lot of overcorrection. So I'm just saying, in that overcorrection, that's going to create some chaos as like the vantage points, throughout the organization, as you said, sort of a long horizon, short horizon, medium horizon, as those sort of recalibrate, that's just going to create it's just inevitably going to create some maybe unplanned volatility in the operation of the business. So I just think there's always opportunity in change. Like a change like that, if that's happening in your organization or if that pressure is coming down, then again, we can run that sort of mental, simulation and say, okay, well, the managers that are left standing, they have a much higher load, and the odds of wrongdoing going unreported might be higher because now there's more people reporting to somebody, and everybody wants to be respectful of everyone's time and nobody wants to be a bother and stuff like that. Well, maybe that's a new time to reinvigorate your speak up program, or maybe that's a time to remobilize or reinforce the importance of middle managers as a part of this. And it's definitely a time for us to raise our hand at the board level or at the executive level to say, hey, I get the reason for this, whatever, say whatever you have to say, but like, I need your endorsement for our program because there are going to be unintended consequences for this. Like every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and every sort of push for more efficiency ends up driving equal and opposite inefficiency, at least in the short term, that we need to kind of account for. And I think to the extent that we can be a sort of calming force on a business, or we can drive more quality into a business, that's done so by reducing volatility at any point in time. Regardless of like whether we're driving, whether we're kind of sailing through a storm or we're sailing on clear water or calm water, anytime we can reduce that volatility, that's adding more value. And usually that value is so much easier to sort of quote unquote take credit for. We're always talking about, how hard it is to kind of show our value and stuff in the organization. Well, again, showing up as a business person and saying, hey, I kind of thought through this. There's going to be some cultural potential implications for this. We need to get out ahead of it right now. And we need to mobilize these middle managers that are left standing, or I need an increased tone from the top because there's going to be a lot of balls dropped, and we need to make sure that we're doing something about it in the delivery of our service or in the delivery of our product. In the interim, as these vantage points sort of recalibrate.
I would just add, in addition to all of that, thinking about how could you recalibrate some of your speak up culture and whatnot, everybody should remember you might have to recalibrate a lot of your just block and tackle policies and controls.
Great point.
And approvals. If you have a policy where two different managers must approve a spending engagement, but you've laid off one of the two, how are you going to catch that? How are you going to realize it? Who's going to be the other two? Or do you revamp the whole thing? Like there are real policy management, internal control reviews that will have to be done and restructured maybe. But to your point, Nick, there about just thinking through how can we maintain the speak up culture? Where are those reports going to go? Do they go to the hotline? Do they go to a senior VP who has no idea what to do with them? How do I think that through? All of that is stuff that compliance officers are going to have to think about. Now I wanted to shift gears to an enforcement action that I thought was awesome. Probably not for the company that got enforced, but this was a sanctions enforcement case that I think is really emblematic of how compliance can get sidelined on a deal and how companies can revert or reinvigorate their processes to bring compliance back in. But the Treasury Department sanctioned a freight forwarding business in Texas by the name of, I think it's called Fratch. Forgive me if I am mispronouncing.
Cool name, huh?
But Fratch, they are based in Texas, and they had a client in Mexico call them up to say, we need help right now to get a bunch of auto parts from Mexico to Argentina. It needs to happen in the space of 2 days, and the transaction has to happen in about 2 weeks. Help us out. And Fratch executives wound up engaging with a air transport service that was ultimately owned by the government of Venezuela and the state-owned Venezuela Airlines, which is under sanctions. And some of the executives there knew that, some of them did not. But then to make this even more bonkers, they did the deal with the Venezuela forwarding service, who then subcontracted the project out to the government of Iran and an airline there. So the Iranians were the ones who are actually moving it. But this had sanctions risk all over the place. The invoice had listed a Venezuela address, and the flight manifest listed a stopover in Venezuela from Mexico to Argentina. And the compliance team was not involved in any of this. Now, what I really liked about this enforcement action is usually when we see sanctions cases, it's like you had sloppy procedures, so you dealt with customers in China for 18 months or in North Korea or Cuba for 3 years, something like that. This was, you company had one lucrative deal that had risks all over the place, red flags that could be visible from the moon, and you went through with it anyway. And it just reminded me of how a lucrative, high-pressure deal, like how often have we heard that in corruption land?
Right.
And then to remediate this, they implemented a whole bunch of new policies around you could not sign a new vendor without compliance first, doing due diligence on them and really involving compliance after the fact. They did get a lot of credit for how they brought compliance into the process. I was just really astonished to see how they were exiled from the process back then, and it was just one lucrative deal that caught the regulators' eyes. Karen, I don't know what thoughts you might have about something like this, but it just seemed like such an instructive case for compliance officers.
Yeah, 100%. I was just looking at some of the comments, and Chrissy, you commented, I just counted like 12 red flags, and that's really how I felt. It's a really nice case study. A number of things. First of all, I think it's kind of shocking to me how often compliance is not involved in deal making or the kind of really specifics of enacting things. So, that's not uncommon that compliance doesn't have a seat at the actual table, but it does have a very firm seat at the risk assessment table and the risk mitigation table, which should be driving 90% of the strategic plan of the compliance department. So identifying sanctions as a potential hurdle and then making sure that there are controls, even if that controls is kind of like awareness and training and policies, outside of hard controls are in place. I think that's number one. To me, the fact here that compliance had absolutely nothing to do with it, that nobody picked up the phone to say, hey, I know that we've got sanctions here. Is there a way that we can kind of structure this deal? I've been in my pre-compliance life, responsible for sanctions. I've been on the receiving end of those calls. How can we structure this through one of our, subsidiaries and make sure we only send people with certain nationality passports over to, or can we classify these goods as pistachios, which I think were an exception to some of the Iran sanctions. But, those kinds of conversations, the fact that there are like no conversations going on, that's a really big one. And the first thing I thought of when I looked at this case was that, that marshmallow experiment with little kids, they put the little kids in the room with one marshmallow on a plate and they say, I'm going to come back in 10 minutes. And if that marshmallow is still there, you're going to get 2 marshmallows. And so many of the children, they just can't do it. You watch these amazing videos where the kids are like, touching the marshmallow or licking the marshmallow or finally succumbing to eating the marshmallow, even though there are 2 marshmallows so close to hand. That seems to me like that kind of short-sighted temptation that some companies undertake. Oh, here's a lucrative contract. I know I shouldn't be doing it, but I'm just going to do it anyway. I can't stop myself. Yeah.
I don't know exactly for sure, but very much the facts were along the lines of, I think this Fratch, they got a call like on a Friday and said, this is going to be a big deal, but it has to happen by Tuesday. Can you put it together? It was that very much condensed time frame. And the other thing that jumped out at me was that when OFAC announced this settlement, they expressly said, for any listeners who are in the freight forwarding business, this is a warning to all of you freight forwarders who might be doing this and might be onboarding a lot of different business partners around the world. And who are they? Somebody we found. And OFAC basically said, no, you have to take care of all of this. I was also struck, there's a real kind of pedestrian contract management issue here, that knowingly doing business with a Venezuela sanctioned entity is bad enough, but not having any ability to see that they then subcontracted out to an Iranian entity, right, because that was not in their clause. Like, you need to be able to have contract management that says, if you partner are going to subcontract this out to anybody, you still need to tell me. They could have done this deal with my next door neighbor. If he had subcontracted to Iran, they would still be in the same mess that they're in. So there's a lot of lessons there around contract management, getting the compliance team involved in sort of a veto level process at the start, rather than a catch-up process and clean it up at the end. Nick, I don't know if you had any other thoughts about this, but I love this case.
Yeah, I love this case. I think this is super interesting. I think there's a lot to see from it. And again, this is a great case to use as a cautionary tale inside your own organization as you're trying to fight for more for more land, or more impact, or more resources, or to expand your program in the ways that make the most sense. I think it was interesting that the fine, I think it was like a little under $2 million. It was proportional to the profit and not the violation, which kind of indicates that the sanction enforcement is being ROI focused. I think that we need real-time transaction visibility. And we need to kind of embed this sort of lizard brain inside of our organization. I'm totally stealing this analogy right now from a guy I had a conversation with a couple, before this call. But he was saying that, when you're skiing down a mountain, you'll love this, Karen, because Karen is a expert skier, by the way. When you're skiing down a mountain on a black diamond on doing something sort of extreme, and you're really kind of unleashing and you're going fast, there still is that sort of lizard brain in the back of your head that will cause you to slow down when your binding feels a little bit loose or things are getting a little bit out of whack, right? And so I think this is a great opportunity for us to see how the right compliance program or the right kind of controls in place can help us go down the road, go down the mountain in this case a lot faster, but still be that kind of control mechanism. Clearly, in this case, they got that call on Friday and they were trying to turn it around on Tuesday. That lizard brain didn't kick in. So somebody kind of put the pedal to the floor. There wasn't, the proper sort of third-party risk management in place to ask those right questions. Presumably, hey, are you doing business with Iran? Are you going to be subcontracting, right? Like those things were not sort of brought to the surface. And so we need to be able to be that thing inside of our organization and, prevent this kind of stuff from happening. So I think, like Karen said, to the extent that we can argue for and, get an endorsement for our ability or our right to sort of stop a transaction while also kind of trying to embed some of these controls in place, that's really kind of our only hope. Otherwise, we're always going to be kind of brought in on the back end, and, our best chance of getting some quote unquote credit for it is just going to be like in this case, compliance did some good things afterward, but none of us want to live in that sort of reactionary mode. We want to live in that proactive mode where we're kind of preventing this stuff from happening.
Here's a great attendee comment from David, who says the recent DOJ non-discrimination memo discussed grant recipients' responsibility to take reasonable measures to ensure subcontractors and subgrantees who receive funds also have appropriate controls in place. Third-party risk is ever increasing. I love that example because that is very different than what we just discussed substantively. However, it is still about, do you have visibility down into your third parties and what they're doing on your behalf with federal grant money, with a business transaction that might involve sanctioned entities, and what are the mechanisms you are putting in place to make sure that if your third parties do a thing on your behalf, are they telling you that? And other people also pointing out sometimes they will sign that and not tell you anyways. Fair point. But a lot of it is contract management. A lot of it is audits of your vendors and a vendor risk management system. But in many different ways, this risk is going nowhere but up. Next on my list was the False Claims Act. And in particular, I think it was in July, the Justice Department and the Department of Health and Human Services, they launched a new healthcare fraud task force that is looking at False Claims Act violations. In a related vein, the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department and the Post Office, which might be the first time we've ever discussed the Post Office on Ethicsverse, I don't know. They have a whistleblower rewards program for procurement fraud, which does fall within the realm of the False Claims Act. So everybody and their uncle in the federal government is ramping up attention to false claims risk and enforcement. Karen, what would you say people should keep in mind here, whether they're in healthcare or visiting the post office or whatever else? But how do compliance people juggle this concern?
Yeah, I would say pretty much in any business. So I think a little bit like data privacy, 10 years ago, where if you were in financial services or healthcare, data privacy was kind of on your radar. But for the rest of us, it was kind of down at the bottom as a pain in the neck sort of risk, and we had bigger fish to fry. False Claims Act, I think, unless you're a government contractor and dealing with the government all the time, maybe isn't so high on the radar. But now we are seeing this incredible expansion of the application of the False Claims Act not just by the DOJ and the courts, but also an expansion into administrative action. So not long ago, there was I don't know, I can't remember the acronym. It's ACFA. It's the Administrative something, false claims, whatever, says that agencies can now pursue false claims on their own behalf without going through the courts, without going through the DOJ. They need to confer with the DOJ, but if the DOJ decides to litigate, because it's kind of small fry, it's between $150,000 and $1 million at issue. So now we've got all these administrative agencies coming at you as a company on their own for much smaller claims. So I think that the issue now for me, for companies, is don't assume that False Claims Act is not a risk area for you, or that government fraud is not a really big risk area. I think reevaluate that almost immediately. Don't rely on kind of past risk assessments. We've got these new enforcement priorities. Matt, you mentioned some of them, that the DOJ has established the Civil Rights Fraud Initiative. So if you're getting federal funds and you violate civil rights laws, like different DEI and discrimination issues, they're going to aggressively investigate you. Cybersecurity, which isn't maybe all that new, but is coming more to the fore. Import enforcement, I think, is the really hidden big risk area, because if you are importing anything, even if you have no other like really big kind of government funding or government client issues, if you misclassify something under the harmonized tariff schedule, however well-meaningly, you are now committing fraud on the government because you're paying the wrong import duties on those goods. So I think that broadens out hugely, that the penalties have increased. The Supreme Court recently expanded the understanding of what a claim can include. So even if you think that things that you're dealing with have been privately funded and privately administered, if there's any kind of U.S. Treasury funding involved in there somewhere, you can be liable under the False Claims Act. So I think the realtors, the people that are bringing these qui tam investigations, I think the DOJ, all these administrative agencies, like the number of people that are out there trying to get at you under the False Claims Act is vastly expanded. So an urgent, I think, fresh, honest assessment of where you may be vulnerable is informed today.
Yeah, and if you're not taking like sector specific kind of an approach to this, I think you open yourself up to a lot of vulnerabilities. Like the ground is moving all the time. Like the winds of change keep kind of coming, and this kind of one size fits all approach that a lot of us may find ourselves, inadvertently employing, it's probably not going to work in this new area or in this new kind of chapter where there kind of seems to be this fundamental shift from, reactive investigations to actually hunting, right? We're trying to pull this, they're trying to pull this stuff out. The bar has sort of dropped for them to kind of hunt a little bit more. And so kind of this generic compliance approach, really, I just don't think is going to work in this new chapter.
But Nick, give me some thoughts on how compliance teams and companies generally can keep the would-be whistleblowers on your side and bring it to you, because there's now this perpetual temptation for them. I could just go file the qui tam lawsuit. It's not necessarily going to be easy, but if I do things right, I get a big $1 million payday when they settle years from now. That's not going to be fun for a company, but it's a perpetual risk that you could be on the back foot if you don't get these would-be whistleblowers reporting in instead of out.
I just think, I mean, in theory or in practice, perhaps in some cases, that happens. I think the data will show that, in over 90% of those cases that end up making it outside of the organization, there have been multiple attempts within the organization to raise it. So it's almost theoretical. So like it's almost as if that happens and somebody goes outside the organization, you could bet, 10 to 1 that that the company at some level like didn't sort of honor that, attempt to blow the whistle on this particular issue. So, again, there's always opportunity in the change. Like the thing I see in response to your question is really doubling down and making sure everybody understands the anti-retaliation thing, making sure everybody actually understands the anonymous protections that are in place, making sure managers understand that, hey, if you hear something like these kinds of things, pass that over to us so that we can help with it and so that somebody doesn't go outside the organization. This could be a great catalyst to reinvigorate the Speak Up program, like we were saying before, to make sure that like everybody understands that, you know, we're going to honor those things. And then again, that quick follow-up when somebody speaks up, honoring that person, treating them like a human being, giving them the dignity that, you know, that concern is actually getting, you know, attention, and it's not just sort of getting brushed aside, goes a really long way. You know, Karen, I think you said something earlier, like sharing about investigations, maybe not the details, but the outcomes, you know, and reinforcing the values, connecting the values to those things can do a lot to send a message across this whole group of stakeholders that we need to employ into our risk management, you know, apparatus, and who we need to influence to bring them into, you know, sharing more of this risk intelligence. So, you know, it's kind of just more of the basic things, right? Like treating them like a human being, not racing them off the phone, not making them feel like they're dropping a comment in a box that empties over a fire in a barrel, right? That goes to nowhere. And just kind of honoring that these are sort of culture carriers, people, you know, culture guardians, you could even say, who are willing to raise their hand. I think that does a ton to prevent that sort of potentiality of, you know, getting that claim sort of made outside the organization.
And one last point on FCA enforcement for people out there who are devotees of False Claims Act actions. There was a fascinating one, I want to say at the beginning of August or late July, against a DNA sequencer maker, Illumina. Now think about it. They sequence people's DNA. They have all of the personal data that they must be dealing with, and their equipment had lax cybersecurity. And the Justice Department brought a False Claims Act enforcement against them for the poor cybersecurity, but they specifically said you did not bake strong cybersecurity into your product design from the start, and therefore that brought us to this poor state of, you know, we were buying faulty, insecure products. And the false claims dimension was that I think the Veterans Affairs and various other government hospitals were buying DNA sequencers, but for all the CISOs who are on the call, or maybe we discussed this at length in a different webinar about how you bake cybersecurity into your product design from the start. That is now something that False Claims Act enforcers are thinking about with the federal government. The last thing I wanted to talk about with you two, Nick and Karen, was, of course, AI, because you can't have an hour on anything without mentioning
AI. It ain't a
AI.
webinar if we're not talking about AI anymore.
So, but I am curious now that we have seen the EU AI Act. There are now nations over there that are putting it into force. Italy has adopted a national AI law that basically codifies what the EU AI Act says. And this is kind of how it happened with the GDPR in the 2010s, that the EU passes a big sweeping law. Each individual country adopts its own version of it. And now Italy is the first. It ain't going to be the last. But I am still uncertain that compliance officers are involved enough in AI governance efforts at their companies, what those governance efforts are supposed to be. Listeners, do you feel like you are being looped into AI adoption conversations at your employer as much as you should be? But Karen, what would you say to people who are still wondering, rightly so, what are we supposed to do? What is my role in helping the company adopt AI wisely? What do we do? What would you tell them, Karen?
So much. I mean, we definitely don't have time to cover all of these topics. I will start with Italy and the EU AI Act, though. So the EU AI Act actually has the status of a regulation like the GDPR. So there is no, unlike the whistleblower directive, there's no transposition requirement. There is no requirement for anyone in the 27 member states to adopt their own law. It's a regulation. It has immediate effect on its entry into force, which, you know, the AI Act is kind of slowly by tranches coming into force. So Italy did not necessarily need to do this. However, like the GDPR, the AI Act has certain provisions which allow a member state to enact, you know, additional levels of regulation as long as they're meeting the minimums that are set out in the act. And I guess Italy wanted to take early advantage. I don't know. They have things like, you know, covering child access controls. They've made criminal penalties which exceed the penalties set out in the AI Act. But the EU Parliament is coming out with more implementing legislation, including a bunch of directives which will need to be transposed into national legislation. So, I think unlike the CSDDD, which has been taken so long and also been gutted so many times, where Germany just said, to hell with it, we're going to implement the LKSG for procurement due diligence. The AI Act is already in its implementation phases. It's settled. It's not in this kind of crazy situation like CSRD and CSDDD are. So I'm a little bit perplexed by what Italy's doing, other than, I suppose, maybe wanting to make a name for itself. The member states in the EU have plenty to work on already. They have to create or supplement their national bodies that are going to be overseeing the AI Act. They have to create these regulatory sandboxes, which I find really exciting. So put your energy into that, Italy. I don't know. And then they'll have to transpose directives as and when they come out. So, okay, beyond that, I keep getting kind of breathless when I look at AI risk and when I talk to people about AI risk, because it's in so many different places in a company. So starting with employees, and there have been some really interesting studies that show like 80% of employees are using some form of generative AI outside completely any kind of control or sanction from the company. I think to ask them not to do that at this point is like saying do your sums without a calculator. You have to just try and kind of claw back a little and put some kind of control over it. But it is a tool that employees want to use and maybe should be using. Maybe there are good ways. Compliance, I think, has increasing demands to use AI. Even the evaluation of corporate compliance program says if your company is using high technology, your compliance program better be using it as well. So there's kind of like, oh shoot, we better be using it. So onboarding platforms that are bringing in AI, hopefully in a rational manner. A lot of people I talk to are exploring agentic AI to try and respond to employee questions on compliance issues. I think the opportunities for more sophisticated AI and compliance to go looking at patterns and trying to find trouble where you don't know trouble exists is intriguing and worrisome. And again, I come back to the resource question. If you're going to start generating all of this data and all these problems, how are you going to deal with it? The companies using AI, so how is that being looked at and evaluated? What kind of policies do you have? And then the risk area that concerns me 1000% is what about the use of AI by your third parties, maybe even use of AI by third parties that you don't even know they're using, and how is that being controlled? Kind of back to the earlier conversation. So, I don't know what to do. It feels a little bit like the data privacy days where if you weren't on top of this really early on, you're kind of shutting the barn door after the horse is bolted, because AI is out there, it's being used, but you've got to try and get control over it. To me, the biggest learning here is that if you are not employing velocity as a measurement in your risk assessment across the board, trying to identify emerging risks and how fast they're coming at you, AI is not going to be the last one that you're missing that opportunity on.
All right. Nick, we have about 2 minutes here, so I don't know if you want to slip in something about your thoughts on how compliance officers can work with AI, or if you just want to wrap it up for us. But, we have had a great conversation as usual. Thank you to all the listeners.
As usual. I was a little puzzled by Karen's puzzlement about Italy, because that seemed very Italian of them to just do that necessarily. I think the big takeaway from this whole thing is, we just kind of saw this recently with the privacy thing. To Karen's point, this patchwork that we're trying to navigate through, and, which standards do we kind of adhere to and so forth. I think we need to take a highest common denominator approach. That's probably the way to do it, especially for a multinational that's working in sort of multiple countries. And I just think there is I don't know. I mean, the horses may all be out of the barn, and the barn may have burned down at this point. So, I don't know what we can really pull back, because to Karen's point, that 80% number is probably conservative. It's probably a lot higher than that. So I just think we got to jump in the pool and start doing some stuff. and start looking at, again, trying to see around the curve on what are some of the negative externalities that can come from this, and let that be sort of the basis for the governance conversation. Matt, you had a great session at SCCE, I think, about governance with Mary. I've heard some great things about that conversation, and this is what we're built for. We're all in our jobs for a reason. We all have these jobs for a reason, and we're purpose built for the time that we're in. And I think it's our job to make sure that these special, these superpowers that we've built, or these gifts that are imbued in us from our experience and from the way that we're wired, now is the time for us to be pushing those into the organization, not for our own benefit, but for the benefit of the people that we're serving and for the benefit of the organization that we're a part of. So there's so much that we talked about in this conversation that can be leveraged, I think, to really kind of push that front forward of your program, to add more value inside of your organization and really help your company navigate through all the change that's happening. The rate of change has started to increase, right? That velocity of change has started to increase. And I think we're just starting to see that rate of change increase. The rate of change is going to increase at a faster rate, I think, over the next couple of years as we settle into this new normal. So we can't be playing catch up. We have to push into that kind of proactive mode. So I really love the session. Let's get one more massive emoji explosion for Matt and for Karen. You guys are always awesome guests, always great conversations. All of you Ethicuties, thanks for all these great comments in the chat. And we will see you next week for another phenomenal episode. Love you all.